worship service. Last week I shared a bit about the Beatitudes, just looked at them collectively. And I said, when we listen to things or when we hear anything, we interpret it based on our experiences and what we've gone through in life. And the last 2 weeks have been interesting for me. On a Wednesday, I meet with a group of youngsters. One of them will be celebrating their 80th birthday in a few weeks, and we have fun. But in these last 2 weeks, we were deliberate in sharing what we hear through our experiences. And it was fascinating to sit on a table with people that have different backgrounds, and backgrounds that I'm nowhere near in relating, how I was raised, where I'm from, and what. But it was, again, interesting when we all shared what we hear when someone says one thing. If I say salt to you, what comes into mind? We all process it differently. When I say salt to me, my experience with salt is playing football in a tarred road, and I missed the ball and I hit the tar very hard without shoes, and that big toe, I can see people. And for the love of football, guess what we do? You just get a bit of soil, just tap it on that thing. It stops bleeding. You continue playing. And when you get home, the mother sees you limping and she said, "Come here, my boy. What has happened? Come, let me wash you properly." She would clean you, get a pair of scissors, cut it, and then bring salt. I can see people say, to those that love cooking, when we say salt, you know what salt does. And if you put too much salt, have you ever had a meal with too much salt? Again, listen. So when we say things, there are so many things that come into mind. And if I say war veterans in Zimbabwe, there's so many things that come into mind, eh? Yesterday I had a beautiful opportunity of sitting around war veterans. They had one too many. And these are not the usual war veterans. They are part of this congregation, some of them. And the stories they began to share, I wish I had asked Janet to post one of the pictures. We had such fun with these guys. And they began to tell me the stories in the wartime. And I can see one of them is here. One of them who seated here showed me how they used to tie their boots. You know, we have laces, right? And you think it's just tying boots. They'll say, no, they are tied in a specific way. So that when when we just throw around words, it invokes different memories to different people based on their experiences and what they've gone through. So after last week, a friend of mine called me and said, he's also a minister, and says, I listened to a sermon. I was happy, but I was not happy. You did not do justice. And I said, what do you tell? He said, you did not do justice. And I said, why? And he said, you just said to people, we listen to things differently. And he said, you should have gone further. I said, what else do you do? And he said, if you say to someone who has just lost a loved one, if you say to them, the Lord is my shepherd, do they hear it like someone who's just got a brand new car? Same verse, but it invokes different what? Different experiences, and you hear it different. If you say to a youngster who's just lost a girlfriend, heartbroken, and you go and say to them, the Lord is my shepherd, do they hear you nice and easy? Or if people are going through storms, we went Chimanimani. When Chimanimani disaster happened, we were part of the first responders. We got there. And we had guys that gathered people that have lost, and they said, come, let's exorcise this demon. And people are like, we've just lost loved ones. And you want us to pray. So different things invoke different memory. So today, we want to share from something that we all use and come into contact. Is there anyone who hasn't seen salt? So that I just check if I... Is there anyone who hasn't used salt? So we're on the same page. Lovely. Turn with me to Matthew chapter 5. And from verse 13 on, Matthew chapter 5, verse 18, it reads, "You are the salt of the earth. But if salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled by men." This is against the background of the Beatitudes. In fact, it's still the same conversation that Jesus is having. On Matthew chapter 5, when he talked about the Beatitudes that we looked at, blessed are the poor in spirit, and when he talked about blessed are those who mourn, and Jesus goes further and declares and proclaims to his audience, proclaims to the crowd and says, "You are the salt of the world." He does not say, "You are going to be the salt of the world." He does not say, "I intend for you to do this." He proclaims it as an active thing that they are already doing. He brings to their attention something perhaps that they had never looked in that simplified manner, which says, "You are the salt of the earth." Now, salt to the audience that was listening to Jesus was something that they would identify with three things. They would identify salt with purity. They would identify salt as a preservative. They would also identify salt as a flavoring agent. And this is perhaps what we also identify salt with. I'm not so sure if we identify it with purity these days. But there is the aspect of purity as a preservative and as a flavoring agent. And Jesus is defining the Christian life as a life that exists not for ourselves, but for the earth. He is saying to us, we exist in order to make a difference in someone else's life. We exist in order to transform, or we exist as transforming agents to the world in which we live in. We are chosen not for our own comfort, but to bring that divine life to other people. And what then are the effects of salt? Salt prevents corruption and decay in animals. You know, if you slaughter your goats, if you are in the bush there, if you want to preserve it, you put a bit of what? Of salt, so that you preserve it. And our Christian life works as that antidote to preserve and bring about difference in people's lives. Now, how do we relate to salt in connection with purity? How do we connect with that aspect of being pure? Now, one of the characteristics that we find in our world today is the aspect of lowering standards. How many have been following the American election? If we put wrong people in the wrong positions, they can cause damage. You know, I know the biases of every media house. They have their own bias and all that. But I watched there are so many people that have broken down in front of the camera. And one of the things that I identified with was a gentleman who said, "Now I can dream again. Now I can go home and feel safe because I know I have a president who does not say things that are mind-blowing. I have a president who does not threaten me. And I said, why would someone break down? It's because of that. And if you follow the story, you realize their experiences with the office of the president brought untold suffering to them. Can I bring it closer home? We have a very dangerous government in Zimbabwe. That when they speak, things happen the next moment. The business that you have worked for so hard in your life, when they have no clue, no idea what they have pronounced, the impact to them. I feel for guys that do accounts. Praise God, I'm a preacher and I don't do accounts. I don't know how they balance their books. Why? We have people that say, and the experiences that people have. So, we have a world that is so full of lowering standards. We have a world that is stooped so low and lowered the standards even of honesty. You know, people are fascinated with honesty these days. You are honest and people look at you and say, where are you from? Because the author of the day now says, just be crooked and you deal with it. And you know, we've got people that have got so much wealth in an honest way. And this is the picture that people celebrate now. Do you know the hardest thing to do now? Is to convince our youngsters that they've got to go to school, when they can just go and pick and pay here, right? A few meters away from us. As I'm preaching to you right now, there's someone holding a bunch of money saying, do you want to check? And our kids think, this is it. You don't have to be honest. Just go and stand there and change money. We have got people that have lowered the standards of honesty. We have people that have lowered the standards of diligence when it comes to work. We have people that have lowered the standards of consciousness. We have people that have lowered the moral standards. And it is in this background, in this context, that then Jesus says to his audience, you are the salt of the earth. We must hold aloof the standards of absolute purity, even in our speech, absolute purity in our conduct, and absolute standards. Hold them aloof, even in our thought process. No Christian can depart from the strict rules of honesty. In order for us to make a difference in our world, we still have got to go back to the basics of being honest, the basics of being truthful, the basics of keeping high moral standards. And that is how we then begin to change our world. So salt was connected with that purity. And then salt was intended to preserve. How do we begin to preserve a corrupt world? You know, salt has a consuming power. There is something sharp and biting and aggressive in it. I told you of the story that when you clean a wound and you put the salt, just that first feeling, it's sharp, it's biting, and it's very aggressive. This is when it comes into contact with the wound. Sometimes our Christian life pains the people that do not believe in what we believe in. It is very sharp and very biting, and it brings about that healing that is needed in our world. And guess what? Salt does its work when it comes into contact with the thing that it has to work on. Contact becomes key. If there is salt there and the wound there, as long as the salt hasn't come into contact with this wound, it doesn't do anything. And Jesus is saying to us, it is when we come into contact with corruption, that aspect of preserving, that aspect of us as believers begin to change the corrupt activity. It is when we come into contact with inequalities of life. My mother-in-law Emily's brother's wife. Mother. That's the one that I respect too much. I can see people saying, well, that's the proper mother-in-law in my culture. Emily's brother, the wife to Emily's brother, is the one that I respect with uttermost more than Emily's mother, because Emily's mother is my mother, but this one is the one that you should hold in high esteem. So she sends a picture on a WhatsApp status. That was so fascinating. It was as if these were people that on a trek, they want to run athletics. And there was a boy and a girl. And it just had the caption that says, life is inequalities. And there was a boy on the trek ready to go. And the trek was very clear. But on the trek, the lane that the girl was, they were pots, okay? They were laundry that had to be washed, and all the chores that girls have got to do. And the idea was to say, here's life's inequalities. The girl child has got to overcome all these before she can get to school. And the boy child just wakes up and goes to what? Actually, you know what I'm talking about. We have people that believe that you don't have to educate your girl child. Women have got to do all sorts of things. Those are life's inequalities. It is when we, who are the salt of the earth, come into contact with that we need to begin to bring about the change. Let me bring it closer home to us as believers. The role of women in ministry. We still have those that believe that women shouldn't be in any leadership roles. And they celebrate that. They have their own, and these are issues that we grapple with every single day. And how do we begin to become the salt of the earth, confronted with these issues? How do we begin to be the salt and the salt of the earth when faced with systematic racism in our worlds that we live? Racism that is very systematic. How do we begin to become the salt of the world in areas where the racism is subtle, in a subtle way? How do we begin to be the salt in a world that is so full of aggression? How do we begin to be the salt in a world that is so selfish? How do we become the salt in a world that shines away from people's experiences and people's feelings? Talking about feelings and experiences, you can never separate people's experiences and feelings. Never. This formulates who they are. How do we become the salt when we listen to each other's experiences? How do we become that salt that preserves in this world? And I love it. As it preserves, salt is said to do its work silently. Have you ever seen salt announcing that now I'm about to go to work when you put it in your relish? It just does its work what? Silently and gradually. It is when you test it. It is when you come into contact with that, there is too much what? Too much salt here. Or there is less what? There's salt. How do we begin to gradually and silently begin to make a difference in our world? In our day-to-day lives, there are certain people that we know that in their company, it is easy to do good, okay? And the flip side of it, there are people that we know that in their company, it is very easy for standards to be relaxed. If I go to so-and-so, it's easy for me to thrive in doing good. But if I go to so-and-so, it is very easy for standards to be what? To be relaxed. It is very, if I go to the pub with so-and-so, it is very easy to have 1 or 2 drinks and I go back home. But if I go with so-and-so, I don't even know what time I got back home. Very easy in our life. How then do we begin to be the salt when we come into contact with that aspect? Friends, we must be the people that help people do good. We must be the people that help our families our communities to preserve what God desires us to do. Friends, the ideal effects of an active and ineffective Christian is the character of a salt. Salt that does what it does silently. And I love the last aspect. So I talked about salt as an aspect of purity and salt as a preservative. I love salt as a flavoring agent. You know, it flavors distasteful foods. When you put salt, you know, what is Colin? Colin Grant loves his boiled eggs in an unusual manner. He doesn't put salt on them. So one time we were having, and I can see people shaking their head and say, oh. So one day we were eating men's breakfast, and somebody brought boiled eggs. And we were having boiled eggs. I said, where is the salt? And Colin looked at me and says, Eva, why do you want to put salt? And I said, why? He says, it tastes better without what? Salt. So I said, oh, well, no, man. Anyway, I did put my salt there. And I went home this other day. And I tried having a boiled egg without salt. Okay? It was the worst boiled egg that I have ever had in my life. But when I then put a bit of salt, the taste what? Changed. The taste changed. I'm not trying to convince Colin to, you can go ahead and everything. But the point I want to drive home is, when people come into contact with us, tasteless things must begin to be flavored because we have interacted with them. Christianity is to life what salt is to food. Christianity is to life what salt is to what? To food. We need to flavor people's life. Friends, we need to flavor people's disappointments. When they come into contact with us, they should then be changed. It should change their crosses into crowns. It should be able to help people interact with God in a different way because we have experienced what it means to share life in a way that God desires us to share. So, changes things. And I just want to ask, I forgot what I wanted to bring. How many sizes of short shakers have you seen? Short salt shakers. Hobos of sizes. They come in different sizes, in different shapes, and in everything. But what's fascinating, the contents are the same. No matter how the sizes differ and all that. And that to me says a lot. That to me should help us celebrate our diversity that we have. As we come into contact with people with different experiences, different exposures, and yet the transforming agent that is in us is Christ, who transforms people's lives. And I want to end with where I began, the aspects of different experiences. So, with one of the groups that we met with, we decided to say, let's share our experiences with the church. And we picked one particular aspect of the church. We celebrate two sacraments, right? The sacrament of baptism and the sacrament of the Lord's Supper. Okay. So we say for this group, let us share our experiences with the Lord's Supper. How many of us have ever had the Holy Communion? We've all had it. I have asked this. Who told you to behave the way you behave when you have Holy Communion? Have you ever wondered what Christ said when we come to the communion table? In fact, did Christ say anything when people come to the communion table? Hello? Did Jesus tell anyone to say, when you come to the Holy Communion table, this is how you should come? Do you hear that? But are there rules about the Holy Communion? Are there rules that are followed about the Holy Communion? There are rules and strict observations that people have got to do when they come to the what? The community. So as we shared the experiences, one person in our group then said, when I said, how was communion? He said, one of the most terrifying experiences for me in the Holy Communion was when I was in boarding school. We were not allowed to eat anything because it was communion service. And we were so hungry, and we were given a small piece of bread and a bit of wine. And do you know what it does to a hungry person? Imagine you are very hungry, and someone just, you know that piece of bread that we have in Holy Communion? And says, this was my experience with Holy Communion. And I said, what did that do to you? And he said, I hated going to church on a communion day, because the school was so strict that you will not have anything before you go for it. Why? I don't know. So we began to share our experiences, and then we concluded by saying, but what does Christ want us to do? How does Christ want us to experience life together? How does Christ want us to connect together in a way that brings flavor? And you know what? For us to connect with Christ, we've got to share our experiences. We've got to relive our experiences. We've got to share our hurts. We've got to share our joys. We've got to celebrate our ups in life. We've got to reflect on our downs. It is these life experiences that help us hear what Christ is saying to us when he says, you are the salt of the earth. It is in your experiences, it is in your day-to-day life that Christ requires you to be pure, to preserve, and to add flavor to wherever you come into